And here we go.
Welcome to the Great Work Insights Podcast by the O.C. Tanner Institute, the show that features the people, the professionals, the thought leaders, and the coolest companies. And now your host, the man navigating the discussion about the culture, the organized chaos, and the best practices that compel great work, Todd Nordstrom.
I admit I was eavesdropping. I'm an eavesdropper, I guess you could say. One of those nosy people who simply can't resist poking my ears into a fascinating conversation. Last week, I was sitting there at an airport restaurant, politely minding my own business and tending to a large bowl of soup when two gentlemen sat down at the table next to me. Both were fully decked in business attire, and they appeared, I don't know what the right word is, flustered or frustrated, maybe even anxious. As I listened to the men, eavesdropping again, I was able to learn that something negative had happened during their recent travel meeting that they both felt needed to be shared with their CEO. One of the men offered his suggestions on how to share the information, but the other disagreed and had an opposite approach, an opposite opinion. As I listened to these two men debate how the information, the bad news, should be shared, I realized something bigger than which man was right or which man was wrong. I realized both were actually scared of their CEO. An insight that was crystal clear when one of the men said, it was something to the effect of, "I wish we could just climb into his head to know what he's thinking." Now, many of us have wished we could read the minds of others, especially our boss or our CEO or our manager. Our guest today, I think, can help us all. He not only was the CEO of Cold Stone Creamery, nonetheless, from 1996 to 2006, but he was also responsible for catapulting the company from just a handful of corner ice cream stores to more than 1,400 international and domestic locations. Today, our guest, Sheldon Harris, works with many CEOs in various organizations through a company called CEO Coaching International. Sheldon, thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
Hey, Todd. Thanks for having me.
You and I have known each other for quite some time, and I'm excited to dive into this question. The question being how to think like a CEO. But I want to back up just a little bit because you weren't born a CEO, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you had to work your way up just like everyone else. Do you remember in your early years asking this question of your bosses, your managers, how do I think, how do I get in their head, how do I think like them?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's part of the journey we all go through when we're entering the workforce as young adults and striving to figure out how everything works. And for me, that early experience came at Costco Wholesale, and I joined with Costco when they were a small company with just a few stores operating. Most of the world didn't know what Costco was, and like many of the listeners, I was just a really hard worker, but I never had any experience leading. And so for me, Costco really allowed me to flourish as a hard worker, but I found myself doing a lot more doing than leading. And I can remember the first warehouse manager I ever worked for, Leo Rogers. And I remember talking to Leo Rogers and saying, so what's the secret? If I want to take on more responsibility, what should I be doing differently or better than I'm currently doing it? Which, by the way, for anybody who's so inclined to figure out the answer to that question, the best thing to do is simply to ask it. And his advice to me was stop focusing on doing everything yourself and focus more on helping others around you to do what they're doing. So that was some very good coaching early in my career.
I love that. I love that. Just ask, too. This might sound like an odd question, but you work with both established and new CEOs, from startups to existing companies. You get to hear and see what's going on in companies every day. Do you think being a leader is it a state of mind? Is it a list of activities? Do people need to go through a learning process to understand what it means to lead?
Well, and you're right, there's all different styles and types of leaders. And, at CEO Coaching International, we coach leaders around the world, as you said, in a variety of different industries and stages of their company's growth. But to me, the main thing that distinguishes a leader is are they doing what they're doing to be served or to serve. And really at the heart of, I think, every great leader, it's about serving. Now, I will say that can manifest itself in many different ways. Some leaders may be more the kind and gentle, nurturing type, and others are the more, firm and demanding type. But their whole thing is trying to serve, whether that service is of a broader vision or a mission or a sense of purpose for the organization or themselves. But the question is, do you just want to be served, or are you trying to serve?
That's interesting. So it goes back to both a mindset and a list of activities, difference being, hey, you work for me, or how can I help you do your work better? Am I correct?
Absolutely. I always look at it when I'm coaching CEOs and telling them that they actually work for their key performers, for their A players on their team. And those A players hired their CEO to lead them to victory, to bring out the best in them and lead them to a great career. And if the CEO isn't performing well, that great employee may just fire the CEO, which might look a little differently than if the CEO was firing the employee, but the employee can quit anytime they want. If they're a worker and they quit, that CEO is definitely negatively impacted, particularly if that employee then goes to work for a competitor or takes a bunch of their friends with them and leaves. So, it's not just a nice euphemism of the CEO works for the employees. It's really the truth.
Yeah. Sheldon, that reminded me of a conversation you and I had a while back where you mentioned something that you call integrity in communication. Can you tell the listeners what integrity in communication means?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really passionate about integrity in communication, because I find so often that one of the biggest breakdowns in human relationships is trust. Trust gets eroded, doubt creeps in, and it's just really cancerous in a relationship, and particularly in a workforce, in an organization. So integrity in communication means, we all strive to live a life of integrity, but it's such a nebulous word. How do you actually see it come to life? Well, one area you actually see it is the way you communicate. And I'm convinced, and I've seen enough leaders adopt this in their companies and watch the change that occurs in their organizations when they commit to this idea that I'm going to use integrity in communication. And what that means simply is, I will never say anything about you that I'm not saying to you. I will never say anything about you that I'm not saying to you. I mean, how many of us have gone through life wondering what the boss is thinking of us because they kind of had a scowl on their face, or they weren't smiling at us this morning, or they didn't return our greeting, and we think, uh-oh, what's that mean for me? And next thing you know, our head is so swirled up in that space, we're no longer focusing on being our best. We're concerned about what's going to happen to us. So with this commitment that I will never say anything about somebody that I'm not saying to them, they can rest easy that if I appear grumpy or accidentally don't respond to them, it's not about them, because I will have spoken to them directly. And the companies that most successfully implement this, Todd, are the ones that not only does the leadership group do that with the employees, but the employees do it right back with the leadership group and across between employees too. So every peer group operates with this code of conduct that we're not going to talk about each other. We're going to talk to each other. Wow.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second, because that's extremely powerful for the people listening that may be much like the two guys that I overheard in the airport, or who seem scared of their CEO. I know that you've walked into companies as the CEO and said, this is what we're going to practice here. We're going to practice integrity and communication, and it means I'm not ever going to say anything about you unless I say it to you. What advice would you give to someone who may be a manager or a frontline leader, and they're listening to this right now? They're going, I love this idea of integrity and communication, but what if my CEO isn't so responsive? How do you recommend a manager brings this up?
So that's a great question, Todd, and one I get often when I'm working with CEOs or coaching groups of developing executives. The matter of the fact is, even when you're the CEO, you're still in the middle of a well, I'm going to call it a hierarchy. Mm-hmm. Even if as a CEO, you're obviously reporting to a board of directors, and if you're a public company, you're reporting to a shareholder, or even if you're not a public company, there's investors involved. So it's easy to look at CEO and think, well, they're immune from the same circumstances everybody else has to face, but they're really not. And so what I advocate to a person, any level in an organization, is don't try to change the things you can't control. Focus on changing the things you can control. And for what I advocate to leaders who find themselves somewhere, quote, in the middle, even if it's a CEO, is focus on the way you conduct yourself with the people that report to you and work around you in terms of implementing and doing communication. And even if you can't necessarily go to the person you formally report to and expect the same of them, the impact you will make in the organization and through the results you get through the people that come to trust you, believe in you, support you, and cheer for you will be your greatest catalyst to the good things to come in your career.
Yeah, and your superior is probably going to notice what's going on and ask, what'd you do?
Yeah, it's so true, right? Because and your peer group will too. I mean, people go, how come you're getting such great results? How come all the employees, the best employees, want to transfer into your department or into your area of the business? Why is that? You know, and it's a great opportunity to continue to share this. And I think so often we think of leadership as some complex algorithm that we somehow master. Well, it's really as simple as, am I bringing out the best in the people around me, in others? And I look at leading as not just if you have a big team, but leading in groups of friends or in our families or anything else that we're involved in. It's leading is about helping people go to new frontiers and beyond self-imposed boundaries in many cases. So the way we bring out the best in them defines us as leaders.
Let me ask you a question. And I know you've told me some stories of when you've went into different organizations and presented the idea of integrity of communication. What's the typical response when you bring people together and say, here's my rule. This is what I'm going to live by?
So when I do it, I ask that it go three ways, a trifecta. Me to them. I promise you that. And I think everybody feels like, I'm not sure I believe it, but that doesn't really pertain to me, so I'll accept it.
Yeah.
And then when I say, but the second piece is you to me. In other words, I want your commitment from this moment forward that if you have something to say about me, you're going to say it to me. And part of that means, I guess the other piece is, right now we have to agree to not only being good truth tellers with each other, we also have to equally agree to be good truth receivers. Because if I'm a bad truth receiver and you come and tell me something I don't want to hear and I make you sorry you ever came to tell me, are you ever going to come tell me something I don't want to hear again?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, and does that mean you're just going to stop talking? No, it means you're probably going to talk more. You're going to never make sure it's in front of me, right? You're going to talk to others about me. Yeah.
That's funny. Let's jump back to the original question. Back to those two guys at the airport. Back to all of us who have been there at some point. You've been an employee. You've been the CEO. Now you coach CEOs throughout the world. If listeners wanted to learn how to think like a CEO or like their boss, what would your advice be?
Okay, I think in addition to the idea of bringing out the best in others is really the definition of leadership. I would say that a CEO is keenly attuned to linking activity and investment, which I'm going to say is not only money, but also human effort, to impact and outcome. The linkage between activity and investment linking to impact and outcome. And if you can learn to think in that frame of reference, not only will it make you more effective as an individual, but it'll make everything you do more effective and, quite frankly, more aligned with what a good CEO is thinking about. So I look at that like there's a great way to think of this in terms of a good friend of mine has this idea of saying, so that blank. So I'm going to do activity X, or I'm going to initiate this project. So that, what is the so that you're doing it for? What is the impact going to be? What's the outcome going to be? Who benefits from that? How do we measure the benefit? That type of thing, so we can make sure that, look, every organization has limited resources, scarcity of people, scarcity of money, limited resources. And what a CEO is thinking is, what is the best way I can apply the scarce resources we have for the greatest possible impact?
Wow. Wow, that is, I love that. Definitely a model for thinking and always going to, so that, what is this, how does this impact people? Is it positive? Is it negative? And who's positive and who's negative? All that stuff. That's great stuff.
It's true. And I see so often organizations, that when I'm coaching CEOs, which, kudos to those CEOs that reach out for coaching, because just because you've been a CEO doesn't mean you can't continue to learn and grow. And a lot of times some guys launched their own businesses and haven't had a lot of outside development. They built the business and now they're in a CEO role. Well, what do we each do to become a better version, of ourselves? And I think so much of this is thinking, what is it I can do to become better at my role and not just let inertia or the stream of life take me to a better place. It's got to be a very intentional focus on growing ourselves.
Fantastic stuff. Sheldon, always a pleasure speaking to you. If listeners want to learn more about you or CEO Coaching International, where's the best place to find you?
So best is on our website at ceocoachinginternational.com. It's very clean, crisp, and compelling. There's 5 of us that are partners in that. You can learn more about us and what we do and the impact we're making on the companies we coach around the world.
Nice. And you also have a lot of content on there too, right?
Absolutely. We have a great podcast series that our founding partner, Mark Moses, produces regularly, and they're just outstanding things to listen to and download. Talk about continued growth and development. Good stuff in there.
Sheldon, thank you so much. You have a great day, okay?
Hey, Todd, thanks a lot. You too.
Feeling inspired, motivated, encouraged? We want to hear from you. Rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. And be sure to visit octanner.com for more podcasts and how you can inject great work and employee recognition into your organization. Now go out and make a difference within your organization.